I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, Lyndon Baines Johnson, do solemnly swear.
I, Richard Bilhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
I, William Jefferson Clayton.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Leaders, protectors, history makers. There is one job at the top that guarantees your name in the history books. A job that pledges to defend the Constitution and guard the free world. Freedom, liberty, and justice. The cornerstones of democracy and the oath of the President of the United States. Throughout the storied history of this great nation, many presidents have left their mark from this high office, and the actions they take decide the fate of millions of Americans. The personalities and gestures of each become part of their impenetrable legacy. Join us as we take an in-depth look at the journey of some of the most influential people in the history of humankind. These are the presidents.
It's a reality and we did it! America is now more united, we did it!
44th President of the United States, Barack Obama.
In 1 week, we can come together as one nation and one people and choose our better history.
Tired of what America had become, voters responded to his persona, his message, and what he embodied: hope.
Hope is that stubborn thing inside us that insists, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that something better awaits us.
Every president, every leader has strengths and weaknesses. One of my strengths is I have a pretty even temperament. I don't get too high when it's high, and I don't get too low when it's low.
Obama was in many ways a mirror in which millions of Americans saw reflected their personal ideals.
I think the really interesting question is why it is that my friends in the other party have made the idea of preventing these people from getting health care their holy grail.
It is possible for people to be united by their ideas instead of divided by their differences.
I ask all of you to keep up the fight to end extreme poverty. Your actions really do make a difference.
And nearly 10 years after 9/11, we have disrupted terrorist networks and dealt al-Qaeda a huge blow by killing its leader, Osama bin Laden.
Everybody deserves fair treatment, equal treatment in the eyes of the law and the state.
He has tried and he has failed.
I believe that he's an anarchist, and I believe that he is wanting to destroy America.
After spending 2 tumultuous terms in office, through a period of geopolitical upheaval and economic crisis, it is easy to forget how the young president captivated the world simply by being Obama.
You can make a change. You do have the power. I've run my last election, but I need you to make sure that the changes that we've started continue for decades to come.
Yes, we can.
On August 4th, 1961, Barack Hussein Obama II was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. His father, Barack Obama Sr., of Luo ethnicity from Nyanza Province, Kenya, grew up on a farm before accepting a scholarship as the first African foreign student at the University of Hawaii. This is where he met Ann Dunham, Obama's mother, who, after growing up on an Army base in Wichita, Kansas, moved with her parents to Hawaii after World War II. While attending a Russian language class, Dunham met Obama. They married on February 2, 1961. despite parental opposition from both families. Barack Jr. was born just 6 months later. The couple divorced after 2 years, and in 1964, Obama's father moved back to Kenya to work as the senior economic analyst for the Kenyan government in the Ministry of Finance. After moving to Kenya, he only visited his son once in Hawaii, the Christmas of 1971, and was tragically killed in an automobile accident in 1982 when Obama was only 21 years old. After the divorce, Obama's mother, Anne, met a student named Lolo Soetoro at the University of Hawaii. They married in 1965, and in 1966, Soetoro moved back to Indonesia. By 1967, Obama and his mother had joined Soetoro in central Jakarta, and as a result of 4 years spent there, Obama was able to speak fluent Indonesian as a child. Following several events that left his mother afraid for his safety, in 1971, Obama moved back to Hawaii, where he lived with his grandparents. At the esteemed Punahou Academy, Obama was one of only 3 black students at the school. This is when he became aware of racial prejudice and what it meant to be an African American.
Barack Obama didn't get into Columbia University right away. He actually started off and went to Occidental College in the US, in California. And then he transferred into Columbia University, an Ivy League school. But from there on, his career really soared. He would eventually get a law degree from Harvard Law, and he would be one of the editors, the first African-American editor of the Harvard Law Review. And then he continued to engage in community activity in the state of Illinois, in Chicago.
During the summer of 1989, he became an associate at the Chicago law firm of Sidley Austin, and there he met his future wife, Michelle Robinson.
They called me all sorts of things. They called me Alabama. They called me Yo Mama. I had to explain, no, it's Obama. And then I had to explain that my father was from Kenya, where I got my name from. My mother was from Kansas, which is where I got my accent from. Well, we got some Kansas folks here.
After graduating with his law degree, Obama moved back to Chicago, where he became active in the Democratic Party. He's been credited with helping Bill Clinton win over Illinois through a drive that registered tens of thousands of African Americans to vote. During this period, Obama wrote his first book, Dreams from My Father. In this memoir, he talks about his search for his biracial identity by tracing the lives of his deceased father and his extended family in Kenya.
From there on, he became an Illinois state senator for 8 years. And he gained some experience in the Illinois State Senate, and then this propelled him to the national stage when he would become a U.S. Senator in 2004. He was someone where there was a mismatch between his persona, his national popularity and fame, and what he was able to do as a senator. He really was just a junior senator. He tried to submit 133 bills, but only 117 actually went to the committee. He wasn't someone who was going to be that successful in the Senate, and there were even those that said that might not have been what was best for him to be so successful in the Senate. Maybe that wasn't the right forum for him because it was too partisan and full of gridlock. So it may have been better that he wasn't such a great, successful senator that had been there for years and knew the ropes of Washington. In fact, when he was a senator, he wasn't really there that often. In fact, he didn't vote 44% of the time. He wasn't present because he was spending most of his time with his family in Chicago. He had the level of fame that really no other senator had achieved at that point, given what he had actually accomplished.
I stand here today, grateful for the diversity of my heritage, aware that my parents' dreams live on in my 2 precious daughters. I stand here knowing that my story is part of the larger American story, that I owe a debt to all of those who came before me, and that in no other country on earth is my story even possible. There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America.
That keynote speech really put Barack Obama on the map. It was considered a manifesto of hope and unity. He was incredibly charismatic and viewed to be a once-in-a-lifetime type of political star. And that's why John Kerry had selected him to speak. They knew that he was going to basically bring the house down. The speech was 17 minutes long. He was interrupted 33 times with just rapturous applause. And the speech sort of built with more and more momentum. And he really honed in on things that America really needed at the time. You know, the themes of hope, optimism, and what the potential was for what the U.S. could do. And after that speech, everybody knew his name, and they knew he was really going to be a huge star.
Obama's Republican opponent for the Senate bid was Jack Ryan. However, in 2004, Ryan withdrew from the race and was replaced by Alan Keyes. In televised debates, Keyes and Obama expressed opposing views regarding abortion, stem cell research, tax cuts, school vouchers, and gun control. History was made in November 2004 when Obama won by 70% of the vote to Keyes' 27%, the largest electoral victory in the history of Illinois. In 2006, Obama published his second book, The Audacity of Hope: Thoughts on Reclaiming the American Dream. Obama's work highlighted his own visions for America's future. In February 2007, Obama announced in Springfield, Illinois, where Abraham Lincoln had served as a state legislator, that he would seek the Democratic Party's presidential nomination for 2008. The primary race was between Obama and Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton gave up her bid and endorsed Obama, the real race began.
So make no mistake, the choice in this election is not between regions or religions or genders. It is not about rich versus poor, young versus old, and it is certainly not about black versus white. It is about the past versus the future.
Well, in the lead up to the election campaign in 2008, it was just tremendous turmoil, discontent, because the economy had been doing so badly. There was one point in 2008 that 170,000 jobs were being lost in a month. Unemployment was almost at 8%, and there was real pessimism and concern about the U.S.'s future. I mean, there was a general consensus that the invasion of Iraq had not been going well, that the U.S. had overstretched itself, and there was real questions about the U.S.'s leadership just in the world, and whether or not it was capable of getting itself out of this terrible recession that was hitting.
As the Bush years were winding down, I think there was a general malaise and suspicion of politicians. We had been kind of mired in this murky war in Iraq, and it didn't even seem like we'd done that for the reasons that we were told. We've been lied to. So here comes this guy who seems kind of anti-establishment. Barack was a young senator. He didn't have a lot of political experience. Up until that time, he was the presidential candidate with the least amount of experience. And I think that people found his dynamic, young optimism. He seemed like a black JFK, and people were longing for something like that. The kind of old, rich white men had really done us wrong. We were tired of feeling like we were part of some white elitist Yale University, guy that passes it down to his son, and it just felt very old school. The Obamas were a breath of fresh air, literally.
I think many people thought that Barack Obama came out of nowhere because he didn't really have a long legislative career. And so for that reason, many thought, this is someone that's just coming on the scene, a fresh newcomer that no one really knew that much about. But in truth, he really had a lot of fame on a national level, and not just a national level, but an international level. Even before he became president, he was able to make a trip to the Middle East, meet then leader Nouri al-Maliki of Iraq. He also took a trip to Germany, did this important speech in Berlin that was sort of echoing JFK's speech in Berlin in the 1960s.
And the greatest tribute that we can pay to those who came before us is by carrying on their work to pursue peace and justice, not only in our countries, but for all mankind.
He's being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. There was a constant clamoring for him to do an interview because there was a huge thirst for what he had to say.
Is victory here a hope or a reality?
Oh, this is going to be a reality right here. But as long as we work in the last day, I think we're going to be doing very well. We are one people. We are one nation. And together, we will begin the next great chapter in the American story with 3 words that will ring from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. Yes, we can.
I think it was difficult for Michelle to come to terms with the fact that Barack wanted a political career. But as always, she wanted to support Barack in whatever aspirations that he had. I think she understood that he had aspirations for greatness and was capable of achieving these types of things, and that he's sort of a once-in-a-lifetime type of person. A type of candidate that the world had never really seen before, definitely the US had never seen before. I'm sure she was one of his biggest fans, but also one of the people that he trusted the most in terms of offering him advice.
Yes, we can!
Well, I think that there are going to be a range of issues where we differ. On foreign policy, I think that she tends to think more conventionally at a time when we're facing a series of unconventional threats.
The primary race between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton was incredibly close, and it got actually really nasty. Probably even nastier than the actual campaign when Barack Obama ran against Republican candidate John McCain. This primary got very dirty. Both sides were accusing others of different transgressions. Hillary Clinton was very critical of Barack Obama's suitability for the position, his experience. She talked about how he didn't really have any foreign policy experience, that he was really a newcomer. And he, in turn, criticized her as being part of old politics, and that's what we really needed to fix. That we didn't really want more of the same. We needed something that was new and fresh and optimistic.
So at the moment like this, the last thing we can afford is 4 more years of the same old, tired, worn-out economic theories that say as long as we give more and more to billionaires and millionaires and big corporations, prosperity will somehow trickle down on everybody else.
It was a real fight towards the end. By June, it was clear that he had won enough delegates, but there's even question marks at the Democratic convention about how he would be unveiled as the new Democratic candidate. And in the end, she compromised with him, and she sat with the delegates in New York that voted for her, but they affirmed him together. And so he was able to emerge as the winner. But she didn't do a ton to deal with some of her supporters who were incredibly disappointed. At the time, polling revealed 22% of Hillary's supporters said they were going to vote for John McCain. They were that upset about the fact that she was not the nominee. A lot of it was that there was momentum wanting a female candidate finally, and there was feelings that there has always just been a gender bias against women in both parties. But for the progressives that wanted Barack Obama to win, they felt that he really was the type of candidate that the world hadn't really seen before, and that she was carrying with her a lot of baggage that was going to be picked apart when she would go head-to-head against McCain. And so in the end, he was the resounding victor, but it wasn't without its challenges. It was a very, very tense, challenging primary.
On this January night, at this defining moment in history, you have done what the cynics said we couldn't do.
The real election between John McCain, the Republican candidate, and Barack Obama was contentious, but not as contentious as the primaries. John McCain at times even defended Obama when he was being criticized as not being a good man, and John McCain stepped in and said, no, he is a good man. And so I don't think there was quite the mudslinging you've seen in maybe some other campaigns, but it was an exhausting campaign. I mean, in the end, Barack Obama won with 52% of the popular vote. He won 338 electors, so that would be considered a landslide. The voter turnout was just huge. 130 million people came out to vote. Voter turnout was 64%, which was one of the highest voter turnouts.
But in 1 week's time, we can choose an economy that rewards work and creates jobs and fuels prosperity from the bottom up. In 1 week, we can choose to invest in health care for our families and education for our children and renewable energy for our future. In 1 week, we can choose hope over fear, unity over division, change over the status quo. In 1 week, we can come together as one nation and one people and choose our better history.
It was just considered to be a resounding victory for him. He raised $650 million, which was the most really any other candidate had raised. He broke the record for the most raised in 1 month that had been previously held by John Kerry. He was able to raise $55 million in just 1 month's time. His campaigning ability was just off the charts. Like, no one had ever seen this type of campaigning ability. And what they always comment on is the way he was able to campaign on the ground and really have this grassroots type of campaign and really motivate people to the polls and motivate people to support him. The other incredibly notable thing about his campaign was his ability to harness all the new innovations in technology and take advantage of this. He really was the Facebook candidate, the Twitter candidate, the YouTube candidate, and he used all different types of technological platforms to connect with voters in ways that his opponents were just lagging behind it.
The road ahead will be long. Our climb will be steep. We may not get there in 1 year or even in 1 term. But America, I have never been more hopeful than I am tonight that we will get there. I promise you, we as a people will get there.
On November 4th, 2008, Obama defeated Republican presidential nominee John McCain to win election as the 44th President of the United States. His running mate, Delaware Senator Joe Biden, became vice president. Obama was the first African American to hold this office.
The actual night itself, there was quite a bit of optimism because Obama was going into the night with a lead in the polls by 5 to 10%. And there was a feeling that his campaign had been very dynamic and that he was likely to flip some states. So in the end, you had him winning 338 electoral votes, winning 52% of the vote, and he flipped 7 states that had been previously in the hands of Republicans. And that was significant. And, it was a huge celebration for those who felt that he was the right candidate. I mean, there were many people in DC who weren't considered, the most patriotic people in the world, who were singing the national anthem really loudly in DC bars, people hugging each other that didn't know each other. It's just a feeling it was the biggest accomplishment that the US had achieved up to this point. But at election night, the electoral victory was, for many people, one of the greatest moments for them. And they probably agreed with what Michelle Obama had said earlier that year, that it was a moment where Americans felt proud.
Did you not think it could happen?
I never thought in my lifetime that it would happen, but it happened tonight. It's a reality and we did it. America is now more united. We did it.
Because I can't believe that I got the opportunity to live to see something so great. Like, I can't describe it. I can't believe I got the chance to vote for the first Black president.
Generations who have lived through racial oppression never believed anything like this would be possible. He was an inspiration to so many, who thought that social prejudices would never let them achieve their full potential. His victory speech in 2008 inspired many. He broadened his "Yes, We Can" campaign slogan beyond supporters and invited all Americans to share his commitment to change.
Being American is not about belonging to a certain group. It's about believing in a certain set of ideals.
I think one of the most difficult and shameful aspects of American history is the history of slavery, and the fact that you have citizens whose ancestors were treated so terribly, were enslaved, weren't considered equals, weren't considered human beings. It's a legacy that lives on still to this day. I mean, you can still see the effects of it in the southern parts of the US. So for Michelle Obama, there was a lot of meaning to first just being the first African-American, first family, just living in this house, but her acknowledging the fact that this was a house that had been built by slaves. And she held very personally the fact that the US had come a long way, but there's a huge stain on its history. It's not something that is going to go away overnight. It's something that the US still continues to grapple with. But I think for both Barack and Michelle, they really understood the significance of their election.
It is possible for people to be united by their ideas instead of divided by their differences. It is possible for hearts to change and old hatreds to pass. That it's possible for the sons and daughters of former colonies to sit here as members of this great parliament, and for the grandson of a Kenyan who served as a cook in the British Army to stand before you as President of the United States.
So help you God?
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President. All the best wishes.
The first 100 days of a presidential term took on a symbolic significance during Franklin D. Roosevelt's term in office. This time usually acts as a benchmark of the early success of a president.
When he first took over this first 100 days, his approval rating was pretty solid. It was 56%. He had achieved a really important piece of legislation, and that was an American Economy Recovery Act. So this bill was over $800 billion, and it was a bill signed that was hoping to improve infrastructure, Medicare, healthcare, unemployment benefits. And by both conservatives and liberals alike, this bill was considered to be a success and was considered to be critical to lifting the U.S. out of the recession that it was facing.
Opportunity means making the minimum wage a wage you can live on. It means equal pay for equal work. It means overtime pay for workers who've earned it. It means continuing to extend the right of quality, affordable health care for every American in every state.
But after this first 100 days and the honeymoon period sort of wore off, there were criticisms coming from both sides about him not accomplishing enough on the progressive side and him, using executive orders too frequently on the Republican side. And so he really couldn't win. And then once he was dealing with a Republican-held Congress, it became really difficult. It was really contentious. And there was a lot of battling a lot of these issues out, and a lot of the times he didn't win.
My next 100 days will be so successful, I will be able to complete them in 72 days. And on the 73rd day, I will rest.
To be uninsured in the U.S. is a very vulnerable situation, because if you get sick and have to go to the hospital, you could wind up being bankrupt. I mean, the hospital costs are exorbitant. Just getting an ambulance would cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And so you are so vulnerable in the U.S. if you are uninsured. As long as you're healthy, you're okay. But if you're sick, if you're suffering from any type of illness that is serious, you will not be able to afford the health care costs.
The Affordable Care Act is moving forward. That funding is already in place. You can't shut it down.
Well, the fight to get the Affordable Care Act was this huge, huge battle, and Republicans were incensed about it because they were worried that it was going to put too many restrictions on people for their choice available to them. They were worried that it was more of a mandate that forced people to get insured that didn't want to get insured, and it forced them to take on a plan that was going to require them to pay higher premiums than they might want. The Republicans fought tooth and nail to prevent this from getting passed.
I think the really interesting question is why it is that my friends in the other party have made the idea of preventing these people from getting health care their holy grail, their number one priority. The one unifying principle in the Republican Party at the moment is making sure that 30 million people don't have health care. And presumably repealing all those benefits I just mentioned, kids staying on their parents' plan, seniors getting discounts on their prescription drugs, I guess a return to lifetime limits on insurance, people with pre-existing conditions continuing to be blocked from being able to get health insurance. That's hard to understand as an agenda that is going to strengthen our middle class.
But, in the end, the Obama administration really pushed through this legislation as quickly as they could. Republicans were incredibly critical of this, but they knew the significance of this. They knew that this was really important. They knew that there were 22 million Americans that were uninsured. The Obama administration knew that they needed to change this, that this was going to be the signature piece of legislation, was that they needed to get more and more people insured. They needed to prevent health insurance from being something that was unattainable, and they needed to make sure that healthcare wasn't something that pushed you into bankruptcy. And so these key changes were really, really significant.
An important part of the Affordable Care Act takes effect tomorrow, no matter what Congress decides to do today.
Today, after a difficult decade that began with war and ended in recession, our nations have arrived at a pivotal moment once more. A global economy that once stood on the brink of depression is now stable and recovering. After years of conflict, the United States has removed 100,000 troops from Iraq, and nearly 10 years after 9/11, we have disrupted terrorist networks and dealt al-Qaeda a huge blow by killing its leader, Osama bin Laden.
Barack Obama's handling of the decision to kill Osama bin Laden was one of the major events of his leadership. He had always been accused of not having a lot of foreign policy experience, that he was naive and maybe not considered tough on foreign policy as some of Republican predecessors had been. So it was a very difficult decision up to that point because he had all these things in the background about his image as a person and as a leader. And it was a huge gamble on a number of fronts because if it didn't work, if it was botched, and if Navy SEALs or US servicemen died in the process, it wouldn't go over well at all. It would be terrible. But in the end, they felt there was enough certainty that they had to take this risk and execute this plan. I'm sure there was quite a bit of anxiety about it, but it was considered successful. And it probably was one of the key issues that helped him win re-election.
Well, I think it is important, first of all, that the President of the United States underscores our commitment to partnering with countries around the world and that we're not intimidated by terrorist organizations.
Nothing can break the will of a truly united states of America. They will remember that we've overcome slavery and civil war. We've overcome breadlines and fascism and recession and riots and communism and, yes, terrorism.
If there's anyone who's worried that the last 4 years are the best we can do, if there's anyone who fears that the American dream is fading away, if there's anyone who wonders whether better jobs and better paychecks are things of the past, I have a clear and unequivocal message. with the right leadership, America is about to come roaring back.
In the 2012 election, Obama was up against Mitt Romney.
I campaigned for him. I donated money to his campaign. I went door to door for him. And
then after all that, you're not going to vote for him next time, maybe? I mean...
I haven't really made up my mind, you know? I just want him to stand up and fight for the people, you know, the people who elected him.
He's dropped lots of drones. He's killed lots of people with drones. He hasn't stood up for the environment the way he said that he was going to, and many other things.
The early years of his presidency, he tried so hard to reach out to, the other side of the aisle, to those that didn't vote for him, to be this person who was compromising, and to some extent, his very liberal supporters were getting tired of this. We're getting tired of the fact that he was not doing enough, or that felt that he was going too far to compromise with the other side.
He's been a huge disappointment, and he doesn't seem to understand why. He's ignored so many of the things he said he would do. Betrayed is a good word for what we feel, and I say we because the people that I hang out with are, of similar mind.
It's not possible to please both sides. And now we're in an era where everyone's an extremist. There doesn't seem to be a lot of strength in the middle.
Obama wants to put a 10-year ban on assault weapons, and that just should not happen, because we have 2 AR-15s at my house for protection, and I think that that's the Second Amendment.
He has tried, and he has failed.
I believe that he's an anarchist, and I believe that he is wanting to destroy America.
Nearly everything that he has is an attack on basic American values. We're fed up with it. We're not going to take it anymore.
Similar to the 2008 debates, there were 3 debates, and the same in 2012. He would always win these debates. There was one debate where he was a little bit more lackluster, but he was able to come back with more energy, more efficiency. He had the added concern, unlike Mitt Romney, that he was trying to run for president again while also being president. So that's a much more difficult task. So I think in some of the debates he was a little bit tired, but ultimately he's a much more effective speaker. There wasn't the same level of optimism as there had been, but the economy was really starting to improve. He had gained some credentials for the killing of Osama bin Laden. He clearly was popular on the world stage, and he could, prior to the 2008 campaign, say he did have political experience, and that he knew how to negotiate with leaders, that he had this kind of foreign policy experience that his opponent, Mitt Romney, did not have. He was a much better candidate than Mitt Romney at appealing to working class voters. Romney really couldn't do that. He was someone who was just so incredibly rich that he was very out of touch.
Thank you so much. Tonight, more than 200 years after a former colony won the right to determine its own destiny, the task of perfecting our union moves forward.
There has to be movement. The president gonna have to figure out, how to cross the aisle. Congress gonna have to figure out how to come back across the aisle if the country is gonna move forward. And we hope for the best.
After so many struggles and triumphs and moments that have tested my husband in ways I never could have imagined, I have seen firsthand that being president doesn't change who you are. No, it reveals who you are.
Despite all the hardship we've been through, despite all the frustrations of Washington, I've never been more hopeful about our future. I have never been more hopeful about America. We are greater than the sum of our individual ambitions, and we remain more than a collection of red states and blue states. We are and forever will be the United States of America. And together, with your help and God's grace, we will continue our journey forward and remind the world just why it is
greatest that we live in the greatest nation on earth. Thank you, America. God bless you.
The majority of those who died today were children. Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old. They had their entire lives ahead of them. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, kids of their own.
On December 14, 2012, 6 teachers and 20 first-grade children aged 6 and 7 were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newton, Connecticut. It was one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history.
I hope she didn't see it coming. Like, I hope that she was turned away, and I hope the kids didn't know what was happening.
All I can think of was, what was she doing and what was she thinking? And I know that however long that time was, once this guy showed up in the room, it was probably less than a minute. So she didn't have time to think or do very much, but it must have just been terrifying. And that just breaks my heart.
We were just getting our day started, and we had a 4th grade class in the room, and the intercom came on as if they were going to make an announcement, and there was you could hear some confusion in the office, and I actually thought one of them had hit the button by themselves by accident, and so I called the office to say, hey, the intercom's on, and Barbara, who's one of the secretaries, said there's a shooter. So I hung up and I yelled to our group to lock down the room, because we have a process for that, and I ran across the hall and yelled to the 2 classrooms across the hall and slammed their doors, and we came back in and locked all our doors, and then we discovered that, and then we started hearing shooting. You could hear it. It was like bang, 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 and then it would stop and it would start again. And
to see some of them there, you kept thinking, Dylan's around here somewhere. Mrs. Murphy will have him. They'll be safe somewhere. And all the parents were signing out their children, and they're all going. And then you're just wondering when there's no more kids left.
Among the fallen were also teachers, men and women who devoted their lives to helping our children fulfill their dreams. So our hearts are broken today. For the parents and grandparents, sisters and brothers of these little children, and for the families of the adults who were lost. Our hearts are broken for the parents of the survivors as well. For as blessed as they are to have their children home tonight, they know that their children's innocence has been torn away from them too early, and there are no words that will ease their pain.
The worst day of his presidency was in December 2012, when there was a massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School. You could really feel how emotional he was by this event, and how torn he was, and how horrible he felt for these families. That this was not just a photo op, a speech that, you know, some politician has to give, where they're going through the motions. I mean, he seemed to be really connecting with the pain that these families must have been feeling, and seemed to be very committed to trying to do something about it.
If you ask me where has been the one area where I feel that I've been most frustrated and most stymied, it is the fact that the United States of America is the one advanced nation on earth in which we do not have sufficient common sense gun safety laws, even in the face of repeated mass killings. And for us not to be able to resolve that issue has been something that is distressing, but it is not something that I intend to stop working on in the remaining 18 months.
It was this stain on his presidency, something he felt he didn't do enough on, and the questions are, was it really all Congress that blocked this, or was there more that he possibly could have done?
Everybody deserves fair treatment, equal treatment in the eyes of the law and the state. And that includes gays, lesbians, transgender persons. I am not a fan of discrimination and bullying of anybody on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, on the basis of sexual orientation or gender.
One of Barack Obama's accomplishments was in repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And this was a policy where gays weren't able to reveal their sexual orientation in the military. It was a policy that was considered to be really behind the mood of the nation, that more and more states were pushing towards allowing for same-sex marriage. And he was a champion of LGBT rights, and he pushed for more inclusivity, but was also trying to strike down against hate crimes against all individuals, but in particular gays and lesbians. And he was more forceful in this than previous Democratic presidents have ever been. Previous Democratic presidents had compromised on this matter. They may have personally felt that the gay community deserved equality, but they didn't really fight for it.
For we are not a nation that says, don't ask, don't tell. We are a nation that says, out of many, we are one. We are a nation that welcomes the service of every patriot. We are a nation that believes that all men and women are created equal. Those are the ideals that generations have fought for. Those are the ideals that we uphold today. And now it is my honor to sign this bill into law.
The mood of the nation was shifting, but he was the right president at that time to usher forward a series of reforms that were really needed.
On June 26, 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling that granted same-sex couples a constitutional right to marry.
I am hoping, despite all the noise and the lies and the distractions, that we're going to cut through all that and remember who we are. When we stand up for our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters and treat their love and their rights equally under the law, we defend our own liberty as well. We are more free when all people can pursue their own happiness.
Barack and Michelle Obama were really strong ambassadors for the U.S. on a global stage. Unlike the Bush years where the U.S. was being ridiculed, Barack Obama was sort of the anti-Bush at this time. He was able to speak to foreigners and draw in tons of crowds of people, just couldn't wait to hear what he had to say. And people all across the world really connected with him and with them as a couple. When you think about a trip that he made to Africa, and he would have been just mobbed because there was just so much excitement about this new leader that could really directly connect with him. The fact that his father was from Kenya. He was able to connect in Southeast Asia because he had some years spent in Indonesia. He was able to connect with Europeans because, he shared similar values that European countries often promoted of multilateralism, globalism, democracy, human rights, and these types of values that previous presidents had pushed away in order to promote a very rugged style of individualism that the U.S. often battles with. And as they would travel around the world, they were really well liked. They were well liked by European leaders for just being very, very easy to work with. Barack Obama had a very close relationship with David Cameron in the UK. He had a really good relationship with Angela Merkel of Germany and other world leaders as well. He's had some tense relationships with some other countries. For the most part, the relationships between the Obama administration and a lot of these other countries all around the world were very, very strong.
We now have the chance to elect a 45th president who will build on our progress, who will finish the job, who already has the respect of leaders around the world and the people they serve, who is smart and who is steady and who is tested.
The final days of Obama's administration were overshadowed by the 2016 election campaign. Obama's presidency ended at noon on January 20th, 2017, immediately followed by the inauguration of his Republican successor, Donald Trump.
It's hard to believe that it has been 8 years since I first came to this convention
to talk with you about why I thought my husband should be president. Remember how I told you about his character and conviction, his decency and his grace, the traits that we've seen every day that he served our country in the White House.
Michelle Robinson, girl of the South Side. For the past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend. You took on a role you didn't ask for, and you made it your own, with grace and with grit and with style.
As president, he was someone that initially was really trying to unite the public behind this idea that we can all do this, we can achieve this together. And he was trying to use his great oratory skills in very well thought out speeches to bring everybody together. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to completely do that because of the nature of US society still, that there's still such high levels of racism. And in many ways, some of his presidency was affected by the fact that he was constantly having to react to claims that he was Muslim or claims that, he was anti-American in some way. But ultimately, as a president, you'd have to see him as very pragmatic, very calm, very measured, someone who valued intelligence, valued insight, valued experience, valued evidence, wanted to make decisions based on evidence and not based on what his gut was. And really was an intellectual to a far greater degree than maybe some previous presidents had been. And was just looking for what was the best solution to a problem.
You do have the power. I've run my last election, but I need you to make sure that the changes that we started continue for decades to come. Thank you. God bless you. God bless you.
On May 7, 2017, Obama received the John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Award, a prize given to elected officials who govern for the greater good even when it's not in their own interest to do so. Specifically, he was honored for his passing of the Affordable Care Act, which secured health coverage for millions of low-income Americans.
One of the things that's significant about Barack Obama is that in spite of the fact that he was president of the United States, he still says that his greatest pride is raising his two daughters. I think for Barack and Michelle's children, Sasha and Malia, growing up in the White House probably wasn't easy. But one of the things that made it easier for them was that they had such a strong family. And something that is notable about those 8 years for them was that there was never anything negatively reported on them, ever. A lot of this has been attributed to the work that Michelle had done in the White House, but also Michelle and Barack as a family, just ensuring that they had some level of stability and normalcy, in spite of the fact that they were living in very abnormal conditions.
Later on in this year, Obama moved his oldest daughter, Malia, into Harvard University with Michelle. In November 2017, Obama returned to Chicago. He is readjusting to life outside of the White House. Barack and Michelle Obama have been developing a much broader portfolio of projects since leaving the White House. In 2018, they signed a deal with Netflix to produce a set of films which would be touching on issues of race and class, democracy and civil rights, and much more. With the upcoming 2020 election, Obama had remained silent. In part, this may be due to his former Vice President Joe Biden being one of the front-runners in the race. President Obama has long said that selecting Joe Biden as his running mate in 2008 was one of the best decisions he ever made.
Despite all the hardship we've been through, despite all the frustrations of Washington, I've never been more hopeful about our future. I have never been more hopeful about America.
Nothing can break the will of a truly united states of America. They will remember that we've overcome slavery and civil war. We've overcome breadlines and fascism and recession and riots and communism and, yes, terrorism.
I think when you think of the legacy of Barack Obama, it's going to be viewed more positively with time. So historians at the moment claim he's the 12th best president in US history. But as time has gone by, we're seeing more and more Americans are more nostalgic for this period of time where it was about hope, optimism, unity, having a president that was articulate, intelligent, well-informed, not an embarrassment on the global stage, someone who could just connect with people all over the world, not just in the US. And I think there is just growing levels of nostalgia for this era.
Obama left the White House in a position unlike any other president in living memory. He's not unpopular, dead, or disgraced by scandal. He leaves behind a prosperous economy and a solid approval rating.
I have always believed that hope is that stubborn thing inside us that insists, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that something better awaits us, so long as we have the courage to keep reaching, to keep working, to keep fighting.